Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Marty Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As I said, I'm super excited to start these next chapters, and those are going to be chapters 100, 101, and 102. So I hope you all enjoy. Yeah! Chapter 100, Rising Winds. Still absorbed in the topic of the Northern Barbarian Envoy and Li Feng's broken leg, Guyuan didn't grasp his point right away. Miss Chun? He asked, mystified. We're not very close. She isn't exactly the talkative sort. Why? Shunyi was indignant. She served as a medic in a hellish place like the Northwest for you for so long without a word of complaint, and all you have to say about her is that you're not very close? The words, "You absolute ingrate," were practically scrawled across Commander Shun's forehead. Shunyi stared him down in fury. One absent-minded, one incensed, both on completely different wavelengths. The two stared at each other for a long time before Guyuan began to catch on. He hummed in knowing, then looked Shunyi up and down with a peculiar glint in his eye. Why do you ask? Face tense, Shunyi the blabbermouth abruptly went silent, as if prepared to guard this secret to his death. He bravely met Guyuan's mischievous gaze, transforming himself into a mouthless gourd. Guyuan raised an innocent eyebrow and reached out to poke Shunyi in the chest. Commander Shun, didn't the sages tell you to speak no evil? Is it all proper for us two bachelors to discuss a young lady in broad daylight? Recalling how Shunyi hadn't held back a jolt while scolding him, he jumped at the opportunity for payback. Vile behavior. Words failed Shunyi. Guyuan was overjoyed to have obtained such prime blackmail material on Shunyi for the low price of nothing. Suddenly, his lower back wasn't sore anymore, and he even began whistling a tune that bore a striking resemblance to his flute playing as he urged his horse toward the city. Gutsushi! Shunyi chased after him, gnashing his teeth. You bastard! Shunyi used every iota of strength in his body to swallow these words back down, lest he find himself cursing out his superior officer in front of the entire capital. By the time Guyuan had his fill of teasing Shunyi, the two had left the estate guards far behind and were on their way into the imperial city. At last, Guyuan adopted a more serious expression. I have no qualms about Miss Chun's character, and she's highly skilled. I bet she could beat up a few men like you without breaking a sweat. It was quite the incendiary statement, but Shunyi wasn't offended. Instead, he eagerly lapped up every last detail, especially when Guyuan began to recount his first meeting with Chen Qingshu on the rebel ship in Jiangnan. Shunyi wrung his hands and sighed, regretting he hadn't been there in person. As for her personality, likes and dislikes, it wouldn't do for me to know too much. Chang'e may be more familiar with her. Guyuan paused. But let me tell you a bit about her family background. The Shanxi province Chun family, I'm aware, Shunyi responded. They produce miracle doctors every generation and practice their arts to serve the people of the world. Their family tenets are upright and honorable. Guyuan snorted. I see you've done your research. Are you planning to approach them to propose a marriage? Well, I'll be employing matchmakers and properly sending betrothal gifts, of course, Shunyi said in full seriousness. Guyuan didn't know what to say. His brother-in-arms of his was quite an oddball. He'd studied a basketful of books as a youngster and was poisoned by aristocratic traditions down to the marrow. But those old nobles only adhered to etiquette on the outside. They held others to high standards and did any dirty deed they wanted behind closed doors, where etiquette mattered not a bit. They were hypocrites one and all, and they knew it. This son of the Shun family was the lone exception. He was notorious among outsiders for his rebellious tendencies. He had first abandoned the Hanlin Academy for the Lingshu Institute, then lowered himself to join the army. His friends, however, knew him as a truly honest gentleman who believed in the tenets of see no evil, hear no evil. So upright was he that he'd managed to muck about with a bunch of army ruffians for over a decade and come out with his character completely unstained. Chen Qingshu had remained in the capital for some time. After all that had happened, and given her position as the Chun family's representative in the Linyuan pavilion, she must have crossed paths with Shunyi on numerous occasions. But even after so many encounters, A certain someone was still afraid to talk to her face to face and had resorted to asking Gu Yuan about her behind her back. The way he talked about her, it was highly likely he was totally unaware of the connection between the Chun family and the Lin Yuan pavilion. He still thought Chen Qingxu simply unnaturally dedicated to serving her nation. Gu Yuan sighed. It was impossible to believe this block of wood called Shen Yi had risen from his command. Then I'll tell you something you don't know. Don't repeat this elsewhere. The Shanxi Chun family is no ordinary family of doctors. They're a pillar of the Lin Yuan pavilion, Gu Yuan said in a low voice. Zhong Lao mentioned it once before. Miss Chun seems to be the family head of this generation. If that's truly the case, she might not be free to marry into your family as a commander's wife. Shen Yi was shocked. Gu Yuan considered for a moment. How about this? I'll have someone pass a message for you and ask her thoughts on the matter. No, not yet. Shen Yi hastily interrupted him. That's too abrupt. If Shen Yi himself wasn't yet concerned, Gu Yuan felt like he might be worrying overmuch. But given Shen Yi's temperament, there was a good chance he'd remain wifeless until he died. As someone with plenty of experience in romantic affairs, Gu Yuan took it upon himself to advise him. Ji Pingxiong, you have to treat these matters with urgency, or someone else will make a move first. It'll be too late for you to complain then. But after another moment of thought, Shen Yi shook his head. Even so, don't do anything for now. I need to think things through. Gu Yuan shook his head. He understood all too well. If a man began to hesitate after just a bit of unexpected information about a woman's identity and background, he was interested but not fully set on her. But it wasn't his place to comment on the feelings of the involved parties. He chose a rather neutral statement. Fine. Think it over first. Let me know anytime if there's anything I can do to help. Shen Yi clearly wasn't listening, immersed in his own thoughts. I was indeed unaware of this before. Now that you mention it, I agree it wouldn't quite work. Still affecting neutrality, Gu Yuan nodded. There's no help for it then, Shen Yi continued. I'll wait until the war is over. Then I'll hand in my seal of command and resign my official position. I won't be a general anymore. Gu Yuan nearly fell off his horse. Shen Yi prattled on, a faint look of worry stealing over his face. But the war hasn't been won. Wouldn't it be bad luck to propose now? You know how it is for people like us. If we're too tied down, it holds us back on the battlefield, and that makes it more dangerous to fight. If something happens, won't I have made her a widow before she's a wife? He sighed. But neither time nor the object of my affections will wait for the war to end. It's a lose-lose situation. Tsushi, do you think there's some way to keep the rabble off her? You don't need to worry about that. From what I understand, Miss Chun already possesses that particular ability. Gu Yuan paused, then broke out into laughter. Shen Yi was mystified. What are you laughing at? Gu Yuan shook his head. I'm laughing at you. You passed the civil service examinations, yet quit the Hanlin Academy the next day to joyfully throw in your lot with the Lingshu Institute. The moment you had some accomplishments to your name in the Lingshu Institute and people began to talk of you becoming Master Feng Han's successor, you left the Lingshu Institute and joined the Black Iron Battalion as a personal mechanic. And look at you now, with your brilliant military achievements. Step by step, you've walked what others see as a road soaring into heaven, breaking the siege on the capital, saving the life of the emperor. It wouldn't be strange if you were granted a title of nobility soon. Everyone thinks you're seeing a grand plan come to fruition, but here you are planning to quit your post and get hitched. Shen Yi chuckled ruefully. Truth be told, he had no grand ambitions in the first place. He had simply run around all these years with a nanny's mindset, looking after this and that, following in Gu Yuan's wake. The Marquis of Order lived in the eye of the storm. It just so happened that Shen Yi had achieved his own fame along the way. But he'd never sought it out, and he wasn't unwilling to part with it. Some people were changeable by nature. They would become unrecognizable every 5 years. Others were static as still water, sticking to their original aspirations even after a journey of 100,000 kilometers. Gu Yuan looked at him as a multitude of emotions welled up in his heart. The pent-up frustrations that had risen as he listened to palace affairs disappeared without a trace. He slung his companionable arm over Shen Yi's shoulder and patted him a few times. If you need Miss Chun for anything in the future, how about I be your go-between? Said Shunyi. He remained absolutely ignorant of the Marquis of Anding's roiling emotions and still nattered on about his own worries. Before he knew it, he had slipped into rambling. It's just, do you think it'd be improper if I keep calling on her without anything official between us? Would she think I'm being indecorous? Zushi, just say something. Actually, forget it. You don't need to speak. You were never the decorous sort in the first place. I think Shunyi had entered the endless cycle of self-affirmation and self-doubt. Perhaps there was no need for him to change his original aspirations, but it would be great if he could change his habit of blathering on without end. After getting an earful from Shunyi, Guyon's head was fit to split apart. Finally, at the end of his endurance, he whipped Shunyi's horse on the rear and took the chance to escape. News that Prince Yan had been invited to the palace before he'd even made it to the city walls flew into every pricked ear in the capital as if on wings. Fang Qin was in his home, surrounded by advisors and members of his faction, when he got the news. After the chaos in Jiangbei, Minister Fang rather felt he had been conned into doing someone else's dirty work. To Fang Qin, the Liu Yang faction was like a rotten tooth. It grew in his own mouth, but was constantly aching and inflamed. It not only did not assist him in chewing, but became a hindrance. To have it pulled was no bad thing, but he hadn't expected Prince Yan to have so many tricks up his sleeve, and in the end, this pulled tooth had taken too much with it when it went. Even without a presence in the capital, Prince Yan had taken the first mover's advantage before Fang Qin could react and backed the entire canal region for his own ends. The canal committee had been formed and factories were popping up like bamboo shoots after rain. It was too late to reverse the tide. Fang Qin was an old fox who had honed a keen nose for stalking the political hunting grounds for years. Reforms in farmland taxes, civilian trade, and other economic spheres were now inevitable. He had wanted to be the clever Oriole lying in wait as the mantis closed in on its prey. He had never expected that while Prince Yan had been engaging him in a political dance, this prince was carrying out his true plans on the other side of the board. He'd plotted 10 steps ahead with every maneuver. In the end, Fang Qin had fallen short. When Fang Qin had first taken control of the battle-scarred Ministry of Revenue, he'd enjoyed a harmonious honeymoon period with Prince Yan's Grand Council. In those early days, a large tract of their nation had fallen to enemy hands, and they walked a tightrope with every step. They strove to rise from the ashes, and with a million things to be done, no one picked a fight with anyone else. All members of the court were compatriots in adversity, and they had worked tirelessly to buy the nation that precious bit of breathing room. They respected and admired each other's talent. No one knew their paths would diverge so soon. Sometimes, Fang Qin couldn't help but envy Jiang Hanshi. Had their roles been reversed, he believed he could have done much better than Jiang Chong, Xu Ling, and the rest of them. If his surname weren't Fang, even if he were only a minor official of the 7th rank who'd earned his position through 10 years of bitter study before a chilly window. But fate was cruel. None of these musings were of use to him now. Prince Yan had set his mind on cleaning out the old guard within the capital, and with the turmoil in Jiangbei, he had flashed his butcher's blade. Now they were as inimical as fire and water. One advisor cautiously opened his mouth. "Minister, I heard that back when the Far Westerners attacked, His Majesty considered passing the throne to Prince Yan. Now he's gone and summoned him into the palace. Even if his intentions have changed now that we're at peace, he's sure to entrust the crown prince to him while the crown prince is young. Should we be making our own preparations?" Coming back to the present, Fang Qin narrowed his eyes. His Majesty may be wary of the 4th prince after Yang Rongui rebelled in his name, another person said, but he used his injury to gain sympathy and took the opportunity to step out of the spotlight. He faded into the background so thoroughly, His Majesty has likely set aside his suspicions by now. Prince Yan has obviously picked his moment to return to the capital and resume his post. He must be about to make a major move. Fang Qin was doubtful. He stroked his whiskers. The northern barbarians have sent an envoy, but we're still preparing for battle in Jiangnan. This war will continue for another few days. The revitalization of the canal region is ongoing, and the refugees have only just been settled. If we act against Prince Yan now, will it not injure the well-being of the nation? If so, we will be cursed by history. Minister, the advisor began with a smile, your loyalty to the nation is admirable, but the imperial court will function with or without Prince Yan. Merchants are a lowly sort, and even these so-called altruistic merchants are shackled by their nature. They will prioritize profit above all else. So long as we don't interfere with their profits, what do they care whose word holds sway within the court? Minister Fang cares so deeply for the nation and its people. We can settle the refugees and fight the war even without Prince Yan. And you must think things through. Prince Yan is ambitious. Sooner or later, he will use his lofty position to appoint members of his own faction to high places and subdue us. If we allow him to continue lawlessly devouring everything he sets his eyes on, it will be our lives on the line one day. The rest voiced their agreement. Prince Yan is talented, yes, but he's too extreme in his methods. If we do nothing, he will bring disaster to the nation and its people. Minister Fang, you cannot retreat any further. If he gains any more power, he'll leave no room for us. Fang Qin sighed. He pressed his palm downward, signaling for quiet. Bring him here, he said to the confidant beside him. A long brewing tempest was gathering once again. Blissfully unaware, Chang'e left the inner palace and returned to the Marquis estate. Whatever Li Feng said to him, it seemed to have put him in an excellent mood. He attached himself to Gu Yuan the instant he got home, refusing to let go, frisky even during their evening meal. Gu Yuan didn't ask what Li Feng spoke to him about in the palace. It was evident simply by observing his behavior. Gu Yuan used his chopsticks to smack Prince Yan's hand, which had wandered away from his own bowl to crawl up Gu Yuan's thigh. Nonchalant, he asked, when do you plan on returning to your position in court? Chang'e rubbed the back of his hand and refilled Gu Yuan's bowl in placation. I'll go back after I rest for a few days, he said absently. His Majesty said he's tired these days. He wants me to return to my position as soon as possible. Zishi, have some more. Gu Yuan waved him off. Just a bit. I'll be uncomfortable if I eat too much so late. Did you hear Jiala Yinghua sent an envoy? Gu Yuan nodded, humming an affirmation. He pushed Gu Yuan's hand aside as it reached for a teacup and served him a bowl of soup instead. As for how we approach these negotiations, we leave it up to Marshal Gu. When a wild beast is mortally wounded, it will often pretend to be on the brink of death in order to lure its enemy into lowering its defenses. When the moment is right, it will lash out. One must be careful. Gu Yuan gave Chang'e a look. Then he blew the green leaves floating atop the soup to the other side of the bowl and downed it in a single gulp. Chang'e started in surprise. He had a feeling Gu Yuan wasn't only talking about the barbarians. He seemed to be reminding him of something else. Chapter 101. Fog of Confusion. Things had been going well for Chang'e for a while. First, he had flawlessly resolved the incident in Jiangnan, meeting every single one of his objectives. He also had Gu Yuan's company on his return trip. Great Liang had been through one military crisis after another over the years. Aside from the time they'd spent in Yanhui and Chang'e's youth, Gu Yuan rarely had the chance to stay comfortably by his side for so long. The entire journey back, Chang'e had felt as if they could stay that way until the sky was barren of stars and the earth grew old. The lonely chill of late fall melting into winter couldn't touch him at all. Chang'e had always been extremely anxious, paranoid about every detail and startling at the faintest sign of anything going awry. Although he was tense every moment of every day, he was also meticulous in his strategies and rarely ever made a misstep. But after so long spent sinking into the gentle warmth of a lover's embrace, it took these words from Gu Yuan for Chang'e to realize he had forgotten himself. He pulled himself together and silently walked over all that had happened after Li Feng summoned him to the palace. The scene gradually took on a different light. The supreme ruler of the nation reduced to an invalid, shut away in a room stifling with the scent of medicine, the heavy walls of the palace chamber, and the silent servants all shrouded in gloom. The entire place was suffused with the bitter smell of death. But Li Feng was in his prime. He wasn't actually an old man. What could he be thinking? Some people, when they realized their own helplessness, would fall into depression and cede their responsibilities of their own accord. Li Feng was absolutely not that kind of a person. If he were so easily convinced to retreat, he would never have stepped out from the crowd when the northern camp rebelled, nor would he have stood atop the red-headed kite as an enemy army bore down on the city walls. Guyun was reminding him of this. Chang'eng shivered, and a bead of cold sweat rolled down the back of his neck. His look of unbridled joy relaxed into neutrality. Guyun saw he understood. Chang'eng was far too sharp. Oftentimes, a single sentence was enough. Nothing more was required. He reached out and patted the top of Chang'eng's head. Chang'eng caught his hand and dragged it down to hold it in his own, and Guyun patiently waited for him to present his self-reflection. At the very least, he ought to say something along the lines of, "What would I do without you?" However, after clutching his hand for a time, Chang'eng elected to act unreasonably instead. "It's all your fault, you know. You made me lose my head." Guyun was speechless. He had been in the capital for less than a day and already been assigned the characters of both the perverted lecher and the seductive beauty. How busy his schedule was. His Highness Prince Yan had been so shy and introverted in his youth. How had he grown more shameless as he aged? Guyun shook Chang'eng off. This boy was getting far too comfortable with him. He grabbed a nearby jar of wine, only for Chang'eng to leap up in one well-trained movement and snatch it. "It's freezing outside. Don't even think about drinking cold wine." Tossing the jar from his left hand to his right, Guyun caught it as if it weighed no more than a feather. With his free left hand, he caught Chang'eng as he crashed into his arms, taking hold of his chin and lifting it for a kiss. Before Chang'eng could recover his senses and launch a counterattack, Guyun turned and draped his outer robe over his own shoulders with a smile. "I need to make a trip to the northern camp. You can sleep by yourself tonight. Recite your sutures twice before you go to bed so you don't lose your head again." Chang'eng sputtered. What about his promise from earlier? The great and mighty Marquis of Order, going back on his word. Guyun was teasing him, but he really did have business to attend to. He should have stayed in the northern camp in the first place, and had only returned to the Marquis estate to share a meal with Chang'eng out of worry. Now that he had a sense of the situation in the palace, he was on the move again, back to the northern camp. Not only did the northern camp oversee the capital's external defenses, it was also a relay station for emergency military dispatches from all over the country, which passed through it before being conveyed to the capital. The arrival of the northern barbarians' envoy was sudden, and Guyun was uneasy. In short, he went straight from worrying about private affairs to worrying about public ones. It was late autumn in the capital, but the gloomy tang of midwinter already hung in the air when he walked through the door. The chilly nighttime breeze had the makings of winter's icy gales, yet Guyun had followed his usual habit in going out, wearing only a thin, unlined robe. But today, when he mounted his horse and turned toward the gates, the winds inside the pass felt more biting than usual. He sighed to himself. In the end, he turned back, hung the jar of wine inside the stables, and asked Huodan to bring him a cloak. Only then did he finally hurry off. Although Guyun had been running back and forth taking care of the uprising in Jiangbei and the traitors within the capital, he had never lost contact with Saibin, who was leading their forces on the northern border. If in Jiangnan the tears of those left behind ran dry amidst the dust kicked up by foreign hooves, he scarcely needed to ponder the conditions on the northern border. A vast distance of 100 years, time enough for 2 or 3 generations to die out, might not be enough for the blood feud between the barbarians and Central Plains people to subside. What did they mean by suing for peace now? Saibin's letter arrived moments after Guyun reached the northern camp, before he even had the chance to sit and take a sip of water. The letter was plainly phrased, but its succinct contents contained a wealth of information. After such a long standoff, both armies had installed scouts and spies among the other's forces. Saibin's agents in the enemy camp reported that Jialai Yinghua seemed to have fallen ill that spring, and no one had seen him in public since. Even stranger, his eldest son disappeared from the public eye at the same time, claiming to be occupied with filial duties. Jialai's second son was left to handle all orders of business. Jialai had 3 sons. All were born to the same woman, and he had followed Han tradition in naming the eldest son the heir. With their father gravely ill, it was no odd thing for sons to compete over demonstrations of filial piety. But was it really credible that the heir was so engrossed by his filial duties that he forgot all proper business, leaving his younger brother to manage the tribes in his stead? Upon reading this report, the truth below the surface began to take shape. A second son, rich in talent and virtue, and frustrated with bowing to his brother's whims merely because he was born a few years later, had somehow managed to place Jialai and his heir under house arrest and usurp the throne. Sir, aside from those 13 articles of the proposed treaty, the 18 tribes are also willing to send Jialai's youngest son as a hostage to guarantee our continued negotiations. The newly appointed commander of the northern camp handed Gu Yuan another memorial. We received word earlier from General Cai that the young barbarians' convoy is preparing to enter the pass and have forwarded their documents to the capital to await the court's approval. This lower general was about to send someone to the Marquis estate, so you've arrived just in time. The memorial submitted by the barbarians was written with great sincerity and documented the identities of the third prince and all attendants in his convoy. The young prince was only 15, supposedly a weak and sickly child. He was accompanied by one special envoy doubling as a translator, 10 young male and 10 young female bondservants, and 12 guards serving as an escort. The name and origin of each individual were recorded in detail, and even the ages and responsibilities of the bondservants were meticulously described. They had followed Great Liang's immigration policies to the letter. Gu Yuan read the whole thing from start to finish thrice, but didn't find a single point to contest. Shen Yi stood to the side, his arms crossed. It looks like the rumors are true. The ambitious second prince imprisoned his father and elder brother, and now he's trying to rid himself of his youngest brother by offering him as a hostage so he can reign supreme over the 18 tribes. What good does it do him to take over the 18 tribes? Gu Yuan tossed the memorial aside. Despite sitting beside the furnace in the tent for so long, he felt cold. He unconsciously moved his hands closer to the heat and rubbed them together. If they lose the war now, they'll only have a harder time opposing us in the future. They spend every year starving outside the pass, and whatever violet gold they dig up is surrendered as tribute. They couldn't even save their goddess or the Wolf King's daughter. The feud between the barbarians and the Central Plains folk wasn't some recent development. The nomadic tribes of the north had established the custom of raiding their richer neighbors to the south every time they had a bad year several reigns ago. The north possessed a ferocious spirit, every citizen born with the capacity to make war, whereas the south had a solid backbone that produced famed generals generation after generation. The two were locked in an endless cycle. One side pressed south to loot and plunder, then the other side raised armies in retaliation. For 100 years, neither nation had come out on top, until Great Liang beat their adversary to develop steam technology. It had been the golden age of artificers, glimpsed today only through the annals of history. Great Liang, with its vast tracts of fertile soil, had been like a great beast awakening from slumber. Endless varieties of engines and armor sprang up like bamboo shoots after rain. Light-pelt armor, heavy armor, giant kites, armored hawks. Steam billowed like the rising tide. Iron puppets flooded the capital city, and the maximum range of cannons, both long and short, was exceeded by the day. At first, the narrow-minded barbarians looked down on Great Liang's decision to open maritime trade and pour its energy into the developments of engines and armor. These southerners and their obsession with luxuries and magic tricks, they thought. The Wolf King of the North trusted too much in his own claws and fangs, and his pride cost him the first mover's advantage. He failed to get a seat atop the billow of violet gold smoke ascending into the heavens and lost so soundly to the Central Plains that he had no chance of turning the tide for decades. Not only was he forced to surrender all the violet gold excavated within his borders as tribute, he was unable to acquire armor technology of his own, no matter how hard he ran to catch up. Even now, the North still leaned on the far westerners to supply them with technology. The 18 tribes ignored this bloody lesson at their own peril. They couldn't simply watch as factories sprouted up all over Great Liang. With the restrictions set by the Token of Mastery law lifted, the country seemed to be approaching a second golden age of engines and armor. If things continued along this trajectory, if they allowed Great Liang to survive this winter and come back to life, the northern barbarian tribes might truly have no chance of survival. I can't speak to the second prince's character, Gu Yuan said, but I know Jialai Yinghua. That old bastard would rather die than allow his fate to fall into the hands of another. Forget the son. Even if they sent the father, we would still have to be on our guard. Go fetch me my seal. That night, a dozen war beacon decrees left the northern camp, a military mobilization on the same scale as when the far westerners launched an attack on Dagu Harbor. Additional troops were dispatched to every relay station between the northwest and the capital, as if preparing to meet a great enemy force. A team from the Lingshu Institute rushed to the encampment of the Northern Border Defense Corps to inspect their engines and armor, preparing for war to break out in any moment. Great Liang marched into winter under these foreboding clouds. On the cusp of the new year, the court was extraordinarily quiet. Prince Yan had control of the Grand Council, situated at the eye of the storm, and every corner of the court watched his return with interest. But Prince Yan bucked everyone's expectations. He didn't do as Fang Qin had imagined and began hacking away at old policies with newly penned reforms the instant he returned. Instead, he took things easy and interfered a little, as if carefully cooking a small fish. After Prince Yan's return to the capital, he abandoned his habit of running around so busily and practically tripped over his own feet. He first lazed about in his home for nearly half a month before quietly appearing at the Grand Council. He spoke little both in grand assemblies and in smaller meetings, and in all ways returned to being the invisible man he was before the war. He spent his time handling rote business in the Grand Council, wrote summaries, and visited the palace as necessary, fulfilled all his responsibilities with meticulous care, and did nothing that might attract negative comments or place him under suspicion of neglecting his duties. Aside from that, he wasn't interested in managing a single extra thing. Prince Yan was no longer spotted among the members of the Grand Council who worked by candlelight deep into the night. He strolled around the premises by day and left precisely on the dot in the evening. He came and went on schedule, took all his breaks, and refused guests when there was no business to discuss. He even acquired a little garden on the outskirts of the capital. Whenever Gu Yuan was occupied at the northern camp and refused to come home, Chang'an would stroll over to tend the flowers and play with his birds. Within half a month, he had trained the Shun family's terror of a mynah bird into a honey-mouthed creature that complimented everyone it saw, though its tail was now mysteriously bald. He had the servants make a toy with the feathers and gave it to the little crown prince to play with. One day, after Li Feng's leg had healed enough that he could manage a limping walk, he thought to visit the boy and went down to the crown prince's study with the aid of the palace attendant's supporting arm. The crown prince was a well-behaved child and never slacked off during his studies. Li Feng didn't disturb him and merely stood at the back door for a while, holding on to his attendant. His gaze was drawn to a little ornament on the crown prince's desk. It was no ordinary piece of earthenware, but had rather a light metal frame. A thin trail of steam emerged from the end of the object, and a delicate little carriage inset with the western clock ran in circles on a pair of rails that looped around a tiny flower pot in the center. The pot was empty, revealing the drainage hole bored into the bottom. The crown prince probably hadn't decided what to plant yet. Li Feng walked slowly over and picked up the device to inspect it. Startled, the crown prince shot to his feet and bowed, then snuck a glance at his father, fearing he was about to be scolded for dallying with material pleasures and forgetting higher ambitions. But Li Feng must have been in a good mood. No anger appeared on his face. He simply asked, "The department of the imperial household has been instructed to increase income and reduce expenses. Haven't they been forbidden from importing these kinds of opulent toys? Where did you get this?" Afraid to even breathe too loudly, the crown prince carefully replied, "Father, this wasn't purchased by the department of the imperial household. Fourth uncle gave it to me." Li Feng frowned. "I haven't seen Amin in some days. This is what he's spending his time on?" The attendant stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Didn't His Highness Prince Yan recently ask you to bequeath him a garden? He hasn't been as busy with official affairs lately, so he set up the greenhouse in the garden to cultivate rare flowers and grasses. He's invented all kinds of intricate pots with Scholar Gu. It's almost the new year, and everyone wants flower arrangements. His Highness's novelty arrangements can hardly be bought for 1,000 gold. See, you put water inside this little carriage, and it will water the flowers at the set time every day. If it's placed in a well-lit area, after it makes a few laps, you can even see a little rainbow when beads of water are sprayed. The Crown Prince piped up, speaking quietly. Uncle said he used normal plant and flower seeds, the type you can buy by the handful for a single coin in the countryside. He merely potted them and put them into shape. He said it's perfect for fooling the uncultured rich. How absurd! What does he mean by this? Li Fang snapped. We told him to guide the Crown Prince. Did he take that to mean teach him how to garden, walk birds, and scam people? Seeing his father's face darken, the Crown Prince was thoroughly cowed. He stood where he was, quiet as a cicada in winter. Li Fang set the flower pot down heavily, a look of vexation on his face. We ask you to learn the ways of governance from Prince Yan. What has he taught you? Let us hear it. The Crown Prince risked a glance up. Nervous as he was, he didn't dare neglect the question. He responded in a thin voice. Father, fourth uncle taught this subject that governing a great nation does not require tireless work day and night, nor driving oneself to exhaustion. The most important principle is to utilize every resource and person to their fullest. Laws and institutions are the foundation of a ruler's governance. As long as a comprehensive system of laws and institutions is in place, all civil and military officials perform their duties, and the national treasury is well funded. The creases on Li Feng's brow smoothed slightly. What? He couldn't resist asking upon hearing his son stutter. The Crown Prince plucked up his courage and continued. Then a single determined effort you can ensure a life of leisure and spend the rest of your time mooching off the imperial coffers. Li Feng blinked slowly. The Crown Prince pressed his lips together, afraid his father would fly into a rage at these heretical and roguish notions. But after waiting a good while, the fury and punishment he expected hadn't arrived. He timidly raised his head to find a look of calm upon the unyielding face of the emperor. After a long moment spent lost in thought, he finally sighed. He's right. Amin sees more clearly than we do. The Crown Prince looked at him in confusion. He felt his father was in an uncommonly good mood today. Certain fools within the court saw Prince Yan's retreat into the shadows somewhat differently. In their minds, he seemed to have lost imperial favor after Yang Ronggui's rebellion and was now too fearful to act. They submitted bold memorials censoring the prince, presenting a plenteous list of crimes, and thereby earned themselves a scolding from the long-gone emperor during one of his rare appearances at the Grand Assembly. His words and delivery made abundantly clear his intention to protect Prince Yan. And that wasn't all. The next day, the emperor, a famous misser, broke his own rules and approved an excess expenditure by the department of the imperial household. He became a scam victim and paid an exorbitant price for a whole pile of novel and intricate metal flower arrangements from Prince Yan's garden to give to all the palaces, dipping into his own purse to support his brother's business. Aww. No one quite understood what was going on with the Grand Council anymore. Fang Qin and his allies wrote up critical memorials and revised them again and again. The new year was soon upon them, yet they still hadn't found a chance to submit them. Even Fang Qin couldn't help but wonder, was it really possible for someone to relinquish their position and walk away after taking up such heavy responsibility in a time of crisis? Did Prince Yan have absolutely no ambition? These peaceful days continued until the 23rd of the 12th month, when the hostage northern barbarian prince arrived at the capital. Chapter 102. Palace Banquet. At the start of the year, Guyuan had still been on the northwest border. The entirety of Great Liang had been blanketed in an ominous pall, the people prepared to lose their nation at any time. By the year's end, the entire country had burst back to life with a shocking vivacity. Even if the resplendent days of song and dance were no more, the mischievous children lining up to buy candy on street corners and in alleyways had begun to don new clothes. Firecrackers popped throughout the city, and every household was busy preparing their New Year's goods. The fallen city walls rose again, and the reconstructed aerial defense field atop the altar of prosperity opened its watchful eye. Rows of Parhelion bows and silent iron puppets observed as their uninvited guests entered the city flanked by soldiers from the northern camp. Their escort stopped outside the 9 gates in rigid formation, their keen spirit, honed by blood and flame, clear in their bearing as they waited amid a pin-drop silence. It had been a year of bitter turmoil. Prince Yan had brought the nation back from the brink of death. This single accomplishment ensured his place in the annals of history. The barbarian third prince's entourage rolled slowly down the long streets. The biting breeze lifted a corner of the curtain, revealing a brief glimpse of a thin, wan face. A hand emerged from inside the carriage and drew the curtain closed, blocking prying gazes from within and without. Guyuan sat in Southward Tower, dressed in civilian clothes, a glass monocle perched atop the bridge of his nose. This wasn't the one he used in a pinch when his eyes were failing, but a type of field scope used for sighting across long distances on the battlefield. Chang'e and Shenyi sat on either side of him. After a moment, the door of their private room swung open, and a figure darted inside. Cao Chunhua, who had disappeared after their misadventures in Jiangbei. Cao Chunhua dipped in a shallow bow, then plopped down in a chair. I'm parched. As readily as if he'd done so 1,000 times before, Chang'e grabbed a wide bowl and poured it full of wine. Cao Chunhua accepted it without the slightest hint of embarrassment and drained it in a gulp, as though the contents were merely cold water. Even Guyuan, the alcoholic that he was, boggled at the sight. He felt he had met a wine flask come to life. Another, Cao Chunhua sighed in satisfaction. After I parted ways with the marshal in the capital, I went straight back to the north. I followed them through every kind of wind, frost, rain, and snow on the way here. I haven't had an easy time of it, I tell you. Cao Chunhua had been skilled in the art of disguise since his youth. He had a perfect memory for learning foreign languages and could achieve fluency in a new one within half a month of study. Psh, can I have that talent? Chang'e had sent him on a long-term undercover mission to the northern border and only summoned him back because he needed a perfect body double for his investigations in the case of Jiangbei. Cao Chunhua hefted his second bowl of wine and threw a flirtatious glance at Guyuan, who was watching him with a hint of envy. The look successfully awakened Guyuan's unfortunate memories of this young man undulating his hips until they were level with his waist while wearing Chang'e's face. Guyuan quietly rubbed away the goosebumps on his arms and averted his gaze, face ashen. What happened? Chang'e asked. I don't want to talk about it. Every single member of their party is a martial expert, slaves included. I couldn't get within half a kilometer of them, and I was tripping over myself trying to keep up. I won't lie to you, Cao Chunhua trilled in high, lilting tones. When I was on the northern border, I once managed to infiltrate Jialai Yinghuo's personal guard. I even disguised myself as one of the second prince's favorite female bondservants and hovered around him a whole day and night. And I was never caught. After over a year undercover, the only one I was unable to approach was the third prince. I've never even seen his face. You couldn't catch a glimpse from afar when he went out? Chang'e asked. He never goes out. Everyone in the 18 tribes says the third prince suffers from a terrible illness and can't be exposed to the wind. Cao Chunhua sighed. Aside from Jialai Yinghuo himself, no one sees so much as a hair on his head. Not only that, the third prince is a taboo subject within the 18 tribes. His residence is surrounded by 3 layers of guards. I infiltrated the outermost layer once, but I couldn't manage the second. Those people are like iron puppets. They don't say much, but every one of them is a top-tier martial expert willing to sacrifice their lives. I tried a number of methods to no avail and nearly alerted them to my presence in the process. I had to give it up as a bad job. Your Highness, have you seen that special envoy accompanying them? Cao Chunhua pointed with the tips of his chopsticks. Everyone looked out the window and watched as a middle-aged man turned to speak to the guards. Though his face was unremarkable, There was an indescribable aura about him, steely and immovable as a mountain peak. That's the captain of Jialai Yinghuo's personal guard, Cao Chunhua said. He is one of his closest confidants. He's a formidable man. I wouldn't mistake him. Everyone at the table was shocked. Shen Yi frowned. If what you say is true, then General Caibing's information may not be accurate. Perhaps the reported coup is a show of internal unrest for our benefit, and the hostage prince has come bearing some ill intent. Gu Yuan stayed silent. He suddenly had an ominous premonition. Great Liang and the 18 tribes were at war. It was obvious the hostage prince and special envoy wouldn't receive a warm reception upon arrival. Not a single person of note had come out to welcome them. The exact orders Li Feng had given to the imperial court of state ceremonial were, do as you see fit. The minister of state ceremonial had grasped the emperor's intent and opted to leave the barbarian hostage prince sitting around in a relay station for Great Liang's diplomats. He had also upgraded the capital's defenses the very day they arrived. The newly reorganized Imperial Guard surrounded the relay station 3 layers deep, changing shifts every hour and patrolling the area 12 times a day around the clock. But it was also then that Chang'e fell ill at an extremely inopportune time. He seemed to have caught a cold at Southward Tower that day and began running a fever as soon as he got home. Yeah, I'm sure. Chang'e was diligent in his practice of martial arts and knew how to maintain good health. Plus, he was only in his early 20s. Under normal circumstances, even gale winds wouldn't break him. But for some reason, the fever overtook him like a raging wave that day. By the time Gu Yuan hurried back from the northern camp in the middle of the night, Chang'e had already drunk his medicine and gone to bed, his cheeks inflamed with heat. Gu Yuan felt his forehead, then lay down beside him fully clothed. Whether Gu Yuan came home or not, Chang'e only ever took up half the bed. Even when ensnared by nightmares, he was a well-behaved sleeper and never rolled around. Afraid Chang'e's fever would worsen in the night, Gu Yuan didn't allow himself to sink into a deep sleep. He woke immediately when the person beside him moved. Reaching out, he found Chang'e's body hot as coals, his breathing quick and shallow. Often, Chang'e was beset by nightmares in his sleep, and Gu Yuan had long gotten used to them. Most of the time, he had only to groggily reach out to hold and soothe him, and Chang'e would calm down on his own. But tonight, perhaps because of his illness, a pained look came over Chang'e's face, and he instinctively grabbed Gu Yuan's wrist, fingers clenching tight. A groan escaped his lips, but he wouldn't wake no matter how Gu Yuan tried to rouse him. At a loss, Gu Yuan pulled out a silver needle from the medicine pouch near the head of the bed, held Chang'e down, and carefully pricked a certain spot on his wrist. Chang'e awoke with a violent shudder. Gu Yuan sucked in a breath. Twin pupils. But compared to the catastrophic confusion of his last Warga attack, Chang'e was much more restrained this time. He made no aggressive movements and merely stared dazedly at Gu Yuan, the rims of his eyes gradually going red. On tenterhooks, Gu Yuan carefully called his name. Chang'e, do you recognize me? Chang'e blinked rapidly, beads of cold sweat dripping down his lashes. You're back? He asked, his voice hoarse. In the space of this brief exchange, the twin pupils in his eyes slowly merged into one, and the redness faded as well. It was as if Gu Yuan had hallucinated the entire episode. Gu Yuan kissed him, wiped his sweat away, and coaxed him back to sleep. Early the next morning, still worried, Gu Yuan sent someone to the palace to request sick leave and went himself to fetch Chen Qingshu. It's nothing major, Miss Chen declared after her examination. Your Highness is in good shape, but the weather over the past few days has been unusually changeable, and you caught a slight cold. A few doses of medicine will see you better. That's what I said, but he refused to believe me, Chang'e said with a smile. He insisted on making a big deal of it and dragging you out here. Miss Chen never wanted to see such a pleased look on His Highness Prince Yan's face ever again. Brides who had just birthed their first child were less smug than this man. When she reached the limits of her tolerance, she bid the two goodbye in her usual otherworldly manner, and Gu Yuan personally saw her to the door. As they passed through the long and lonely corridors of the Marquis estate, Gu Yuan suddenly spoke in quiet tones. I didn't ask Miss Chen to come here to treat a cold. When his fever spiked last night, I saw twin pupils in his eyes. I was concerned. Chen Qingshu immediately adopted a more serious expression, a frown creasing her brow. Please elaborate, my lord. Guyuan explained how Chang'eng had taken a sudden turn for the worse before immediately regaining clarity. What do you think is going on with him? She pondered, her eyes lowered, as if carefully recalling what she had just read from Chang'eng's pulse. She thought for so long that Guyuan had grown nervous by the time she finally spoke. His Highness has a strong will. It is truly admirable. Guyuan understood at once. You mean his current lucidity is entirely due to his own self-control, and some cracks showed because he was muddled by fever last night? Chen Qingshu nodded. His Highness has been tormented by the Wu'er Ge since he was a child. He's accustomed to it, and usually remains partially alert even while asleep. It's just that he is young and strong now, with energy to spare. But as the years pass and his strength wanes, I worry whether he can keep it up indefinitely. But Guyuan was struck by a different concern. If that's the case, then his symptoms will manifest if he's ill or injured, or accidentally consumes some drug that induces confusion? That would be the logical assumption, yes. It depends on the severity of the ailment. But Guyuan thought for a moment. A while back, he was injured in Jiangbei. He was unconscious for a whole day and night from blood loss. But he was very calm the whole time. He never suffered a Wu'er Ge attack. He wasn't even woken by any nightmares. Chen Qingshu froze in shock. Miss Chen? Impossible, Chen Qingshu muttered. Was it the qi and blood all along? Was I on the wrong track entirely? It was quite an alarming statement, but Chen Qingshu made no move to explain. As if struck by some empathy, she turned to leave without another word. Hey, Miss Chen, let me think about it. With these parting words, Chen Qingshu glided off as if her feet didn't touch the ground. She was a dozen meters away in the blink of an eye and soon disappeared from sight. Shen Yi, who happened to have come calling, was giving Huo Dan an earful about all of Guyuan's faults. He started straight after walking through the gate and had been going for 15 minutes without taking a break. Captain Huo, meanwhile, was fretting over how to politely rid himself of this chatterbox. Yet, as he was still racking his brains, Shen Yi's mouth snapped shut of his own accord. Huo Dan looked up to see a white figure sweeping across his field of vision like a fluttering ghost as General Shen turned into a towering wooden plank of a man beside him. Miss Chen? Shen Yi greeted her. Chen Qingshu wasn't the talkative type and responded with a succinct greeting of her own. General Shen? After this exchange of salutations, the two stared awkwardly at each other for a long moment before Shen Yi realized he was blocking her way. He scrambled to the side in a panic. After you, Miss Chen. Chen Qingshu had thought he'd been about to speak to her. She shot him a mystified glance, then drifted off like a flurry of snowflakes in the wintertime. In fact, Shen Yi had come to see Guyuan on official business. His Majesty has left the barbarian envoy languishing in that relay station for days now. He plans to formally receive him at the annual palace banquet as a show of strength, but the barbarians have their shamanic skills, and he's afraid some agents left behind by the barbarian woman may have escaped the purges. To avoid a repeat of what the Imperial Guard attempted on the Altar of Prosperity, the guard detail in the palace will be jointly arranged by the Northern Camp, the Palace Guard, and the newly reorganized Imperial Guard so each can provide checks on the other. He's asking you to supervise the proceedings in person. Guyuan nodded. Li Feng was once bitten, twice shy. This year's palace feast was magnificent to the point of decadence and unsubtle display of Great Liang's wealth and power. Guards stood in intimidating ranks on either side of the hall, every soldier armored with a blade at his hip. Even their own people felt rather like they were walking into a Hongman banquet and might see some famed minister of state murdered before their eyes. It was also Guyuan's first time seeing the barbarian third prince, rumored to be so fragile he could keel over dead at the slightest breeze. The youth was 14 or 15 years of age, elegant in appearance, but with a wan complexion and a decidedly wooden expression. He kept his eyes glued to the ground and did nothing without prompting from its attendants, who led him forward to greet the emperor as if he lacked the ability to move on his own. "May the Emperor of Great Liang forgive us," said the special envoy. "The third prince was born of congenital deficiencies. If he violates any rules of etiquette during this banquet, I beg your majesty forgive him on account of his youth and inexperience. Li Fang waved a hand and ordered them to rise, but the young man acted as if he hadn't heard a thing. He seemed not to understand the language. The special envoy leaned down and murmured a series of coaxing words into his ear, still wearing a vacant look of confusion. The third prince was half supported and half hauled upright by the special envoy and hustled back to his seat. Guyuan's keen ears pricked. He heard the people nearby whisper among themselves in low tones. Is this third prince an idiot? What did Yala Yinghuo mean by sending an idiot son to the capital as a hostage? Guyuan locked eyes with Shen Yi, who was standing not too far away, their expressions identically grim. Perhaps he was overthinking things. Still, Guyuan sensed something ominous about that young man. As Li Fang's bureaucratic exchange with the barbarians neared its end, the barbarian envoy made a seemingly innocuous remark. Before I departed to my homeland, I heard that the Emperor of Great Liang has under his command 2 subjects one simply must meet. One is the great hero Marquis Gu, who's never lost a battle, and whose acquaintance I've already had the great fortune to make today. But the other seems not to be in attendance. Of whom do you speak, envoy? Li Fang asked. The young man who heads your 6 ministries, the barbarian envoy said with a smile. His Highness Prince Yan. He has quite the connection to my tribe as well. Gu Yuan's eyelid twitched. Li Fang swept his gaze around the room to find that Chang'eng was indeed absent. Where is Amin? Alrighty, folks. Well, we have reached the end of part 3 of Arc 13. And okay, so the first thing that I am going to say is going back to page 137 when all of Fang Qing's people were basically like, we need to keep moving. We can't take a rest now because there's no telling what Chang'eng has in store, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, our lives are at stake if he, gains more power and stuff. I was just kind of like, well, yeah, your lives are at stake, but whose fault is that? Like, if y'all would have just been decent human beings, had he gained more power, or if he gains more power, maybe things would actually move in your favor. You think? But, their goals are different, so I understand, whatever. But I just thought that was funny, how people, when they're, devious people, when they're in dire straits or whatever, or they're in fear of bad things happening to them, they talk as if they aren't the ones who dug their own graves, if they aren't the ones who put themselves in their precarious situations. So I just thought that was funny. The other thing I wanted to talk about is Cao Chunhua. I need your skills because I need to know how in the world to become fluent in a language in just 1 month. 一个月. Like, what? Huh? 31天, 31 days, or 30, 28 if you're in February. I need that, okay? Because I've been studying Mandarin. And while I do a good job, and I'm actually taking a break right now for a list of reasons, it's taken me longer than a month. Much longer than a month. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm just wondering what's going on with the 18 tribes and Jialang Yinghuo and everything. And I totally agree with Gu Yuan's perspective is like, okay, why is he sending an idiot son? Because typically speaking, when someone sends a hostage to another kingdom or to another ruler, they are, worthy, of being a hostage. Like they're just not some throwaway that you're giving because that makes it worthless then. So let's see what happens. Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Well, Eineman.